Professional wrestlers often seem like superheroes, but sadly, they grow old just like the rest of us. Their bodies break down, their speed leaves them, their hairlines recede, and eventually it's just time to hang up the tights. But most wrestlers end up going a few years longer than they should, and others decide to go decades, and it can get a little sad. Now, if a wrestler is happy and they're healthy and the fans are still receptive, then who are we to judge if they want to keep going into their old age? Absolutely nobody should, but we're gonna do it anyway. I'm Andrew with WhatCulture, and here are 10 wrestlers who hung on way too long. Number 10, Hulk Hogan. While in the WWF, Hulk Hogan was never a great worker. He was in a lot of classic matches, but it was more due to his charisma than his work rate that made him so well remembered. Due to a string of injuries and advancing age, the Hulkster was a below average worker by the time he jumped to WCW in his early 40s. By the time he went back to WWE in 2002, he was largely immobile. And by the time he wrestled his last match in TNA, well, he was basically doing something that didn't resemble a wrestling match in any form. WrestleMania 18 was probably the time for Hogan to hang up the red and the yellow and the black and the white. Sure, I mean, we would have missed out on the awesomely ridiculous Shawn Michaels match at SummerSlam 2004, but it would have also saved us from his TNA work and Mr. America, so seems like a bit of a fair trade-off. Number 9, Sting. By the time WCW went out of business, Sting was already in his early 40s, so there would have been no shame in him calling it a career right then. He'd made enough money and he'd taken enough bumps to have earned his retirement. However, he kept the dream alive in TNA. Probably shouldn't have. Year after year, he thought of retiring, and year after year, Dixie Carter personally drove a dump truck full of money and then dropped it off at his house. Near his mid-50s, time finally caught up to Sting. He was noticeably slower, he began wearing a shirt to cover up his physique, and most tragically of all, he went through something that a lot of middle-aged men go through. He turned into the Joker. Number 8, Roddy Piper. Piper was the man in the 80s, from WrestleMania to They Live. But when you have a giant ungodly scar from a hip replacement leaving you barely able to take a bump, and they point it out as part of a storyline, it might be time to hang up the boots. That was the tale of Roddy Piper back in 1996, 15 years before his last WWE match. Hot Rod was never quite full-time after the 80s, but the thousands of matches he'd already been in had taken their toll. By the time he got to WCW, his matches were more sad than entertaining, and his once brilliant promos were just kind of weird. So I choose to remember him in his prime, chewing bubblegum, kicking ass, and dressing up in blackface. Number 7, The Big Show. Unlike others on this list, Big Show's the only wrestler to continually receive "please retire" chants. He can still put on a decent match now and then, but it's beyond time to call it a career. And the thing is, it's not really all his fault. Had he debuted in the 80s, he wouldn't be so painfully overexposed by now. If you add up Big Show's televised WWE and WCW matches, we've seen him wrestle over 900 times. There's nothing more he can say, there's nothing more he can do that would feel fresh. And we've seen him turn so many times, it's become one of wrestling's longest running jokes. By the time you finish watching this video, he'll probably have turned at least 3 times. Number 6, Bruno Sammartino. When WWE brings up Bruno these days, they speak of him in awe. As a man who helped build the company and held the title for over 4,000 days, it was an incredible run and he was a hero. Bruno, though, actually made it into the WrestleMania era as a wrestler. It's okay if you don't remember him, because at that time his biggest match was at WrestleMania 2, where he was just kind of some random dude in the football wrestler battle royal thing they had going on. He was basically the Rusev of it, a guy with a little bit of credibility, but you know he's not going to win. Bruno retired in 1981, but Vince Jr. got him to come back to work as he took the company national, because there's absolutely nobody else he could have got to take on Hercules Hernandez and the Designated Hitman on the 3rd match on the card. Number 5, Kevin Nash. It's impossible to say where the wrestling business would be right now without Scott Hall and Kevin Nash invading WCW. Big Sexy helped ignite a wrestling explosion and brought it back into the mainstream. So you can understand why after WCW went under, WWE wanted him back. Another NW invasion seemed like a great idea, and then everything went to hell. Nash was soon injured, Hall was fired, Hogan was turned babyface. After spending months on the sidelines, Big Daddy Cool finally came back to save the NWO, and then immediately blew out his quad. He had a pretty long run in TNA, and then he came back to powerbomb CM Punk and fight Triple H in a ladder match, which was likely the worst match concept creative could have come up with for a man with thousands of leg injuries. Number 4, Superstar. Billy Graham. Billy Graham was way ahead of his time, so you can't really blame him for wanting to stay around as long as he could, but he ended up sticking around way too far past his prime, and he didn't resemble any sort of superstar by the end. Graham was a top star in the WWF and the NWA, but his WrestleMania run was awful. After being gone for a few years, Mean Gene Okerlund told us the former champ was returning. We then saw Graham in Arizona with a tarantula on his head for absolutely no reason. The promo was brief, but Superstar assured us he was bad to the bone. But did he really just mean he had bad bones? Because after rejoining the company in 1986, Billy needed a new hip. He went away for a bit and returned as a shell of his former self. This was a guy that Hogan copied, but sadly now looked like a broken down Hogan. Number 3, the Great Khali. Now, many people would argue that Khali should have never hung on to the wrestling business in the first place, but let's just be mature here. If we can get past his poor in-ring skills for a moment, you can at least see why Vince wanted to bring him in. Khali's a true giant, he looked downright terrifying for a time, so having guys like Taker and Cena go over on him could theoretically make them look stronger. The problem is, though, well past the point Khali had any sort of in-ring credibility left, he was turned into a comedy act, so he dated Natalya, he had an awful kiss cam segment, and he buddied up with Hornswoggle. In the ring, it was even worse. He looked barely capable of walking. His huge physique began to shrink, and then he looked to have trouble standing. In his last couple years, his matches were always a couple minutes long at most. They revolved around him spending most of his time on the mat, or chopping somebody into the corner and holding onto the ropes. When you can't run, or bump, or jump, and you need to hold on to the ropes, it means you're a couple years past retirement age. Number 2, Ric Flair. When looking back on Ric's career, most think of that amazing finale and what a tremendous send-off it was. But what a lot of fans don't recall is that prior to that, Flair was wasted in the mid-card for years. Post-Evolution was a bad run for the Nature Boy. He was used to put over monsters in squash matches like Umaga and the Great Khali. It just felt bad to watch. Flair was still pretty damn good into his 50s, but near the end of his run, you couldn't help but cringe every time he took a back body drop. And the less said about his time in TNA, the better. It just didn't feel right watching such a great retirement match, and then watching him going out and losing to Abyss. It just wasn't right. Not right at all. Coming in at number 1 is Andre the Giant. Andre may have been the most successful big man in the history of the business, and a man who transcended wrestling into pop culture, but he was really hard to watch at the end of his career. As stated by many of his fellow wrestlers, he was a man that lived life as much as he could during his short time on Earth. He partied hard, he was a legendary drinker, but he was also in constant agonizing pain. His last notable singles run was against the Ultimate Warrior, often jobbing to him in house shows across the country in a single minute, leaving paying customers feeling ripped off. When Andre was on offense, he had to rely on holding the ropes just so he wouldn't topple over. It was a sad way to watch such a legendary figure go out. That is the list. Thank you so much for watching. Got any other wrestlers who should have hung it up sooner? Sound off below. I'm Andrew with WhatCulture, and you can follow me at Andrew Sochuk on Twitter. And make sure to subscribe to our channel for more great wrestling content from people that will know when to hang it up when it's time.